Good evening. Welcome to MUFON Los Angeles. My name is Steve Murillo. I'm the State Section Director for MUFON LA. We have a very interesting program tonight. Jason Martell. He's going to be talking to us about ancient technology, the extraterrestrial connection. Most ancient cultures speak of a time when their gods visited them. They never say their gods came across the ocean. They never say their gods came from the mountains. They always came down from the skies. Was ancient man visited by gods or extraterrestrials? Tonight we're going to find out. Jason Martell recently garnered worldwide attention by recreating the Baghdad Battery. Residing in the National Museum of Iraq, the discovery of this 2,000-year-old device suggests that the modern battery was not invented in 1800 by Count Alessandro Volt, but by someone much older. Tonight, Jason is going to be presenting his work in the next scientific recreation of ancient technology based upon data obtained from Sumerian cuneiform cylinder seals from 3000 BC. He's also going to be in the planning stages of several groundbreaking international research expeditions. He's going to tell us about them. The expeditions focus on gaining access to ancient Sumerian artifacts and other archaeological relics not currently accessible to the public. By bringing worldwide attention to these hidden artifacts, Mr. Martell hopes to usher in a new era in ancient astronaut theory. You've seen him on the Discovery Channel, the History Channel, and now here at MUFON Los Angeles. Please give a warm welcome to Jason Martell.
Good evening, everyone. Well, thank you very much for coming out. This is great to be asked to be speaking again to MUFON Los Angeles. I'm a huge advocate of MUFON. As you'll see at the end of my slide presentation as we go through 125 slides tonight, I'm very much an advocate of using modern technology to further the research in the paranormal field, and not only speaking and doing it firsthand, but also getting people that are also interested in this a way to get involved with the research. So stay tuned at the end. So for tonight, what I'm going to do is focus on the ancient astronaut theory. And many of you have maybe have seen the show Ancient Aliens on the History Channel, which thank you to the History Channel and Prometheus Entertainment, the production company, who's been doing an excellent job. There's a season 3 that will be coming out with 16 new episodes in the summer. I hope to be asked to be a part of it. It was a very excellent experience being in season 1 and season 2. And really the main part is just getting more people exposed to this type of information on a playing field that isn't put this information in the light of, ludicrous or, spoken with a slight snicker or laughter after bringing up the topics, actually looking at it with legitimate science and saying, we might not fully understand what this implication is, but we acknowledge that it is significant. So what I'm going to kind of do, and forgive me if I go through some of these kind of fast because I am going to zip through a lot tonight. What I'm going to kind of do is take you on the path that got me to where I am now in doing 15 years of research into this. When I was a college student, someone had kind of mentioned to me that there was a face in pyramids on Mars, and I was like, no, there's not. Something like that, NASA would, of course, tell us. That would be, life-changing, information. So I looked into this on my own, and the information that I was able to bequeath was pretty much that there is no intelligent life in the universe. There's nothing on Mars, artificial in nature. And this really piqued my interest as just a layman, but skilled in technology and using image manipulation and such to look at some of the satellite telemetry and kind of make up my own opinion. And so I'm going to share some of that with you as we venture down this topic tonight. So just some basic information about Mars to start off with. Obviously, it doesn't have much of an atmosphere anymore. It looks pretty much like a dead, barren planet to the first look, or at least how they show it. We're going to be doing a bunch of new missions to Mars over the next 10 years, focusing on looking for, biology and signs of life and, what type of minerals and things we could use when we send manned missions there to set up base camps and such. What I focus my research on is the amount of data that we've been able to extract. So you can see an exponential increase in the way the data packages that we retrieve from the satellite telemetry. We're getting a lot more with the technology that we're currently have in orbit. This is one of the new cameras, and so you get an idea. You can see, like, as pixel ratio goes, that at the same distance we get now 30 centimeters per pixel where it used to be 150. So in theory we're getting a lot more detail, and that, I'll stress, is for a reason I'll show in a minute. But you can see basically new technology using infrared and ground penetrating radar and just various new technology that they're going to be deploying, a whole bunch of landers and orbiters to Mars. So a lot of people have always asked, is there a NASA cover-up? You know, National Aeronautics Space Administration could also be never a straight answer. What I found is that there isn't actually a cover-up at NASA. I've stopped pointing my finger saying, it's a cover-up, they know. They actually don't know. For the most part, these are engineers and people, you know, some gentleman maybe that's been working as an engineer at NASA or one of the conglomerate space agencies, Goddard Space Center, Jet Propulsion Laboratories. And he's been building a device for 25 years that's going to be on one of the landers, and it's going to stick into the dirt and look for some type of amino acid. There's nothing being developed at NASA right now that's going to stick into the dirt or like try and catch an animal. It has no intention of looking for life as we know it. There's a process. And so, like any scientific hypothesis, they have to be able to confirm their data. And so we're not quite there yet, at least with the American technology, of developing some instrument that's going to stick into the dirt and actually say, yes, life is here. We're making gradual steps to that, but there's a little bit of a political backup, since I think most people, and in some of the things I'll show you, would probably agree that yes, there's been life, there's probably life there now. Could you please hurry up? So we'll see how that process goes. The Mars Global Surveyor was one of the first instruments that I became aware of when I was in college. This was deployed in 1998. And what's interesting about a lot of the orbiters we send to Mars is that the principal photographer, Dr. Mike Malin, is the one who staffs all the cameras of the orbiters we're sending to Mars. So all the images that we get from Mars are processed by his camera lens, Dr. Mike Malin, which coincidentally is in San Diego, where I was attending college at the time when I had first heard, is there a face or pyramid on Mars? So I contacted Dr. Mike Malin at Malin Space Science Systems and asked him, just as a college student, is there any possibility that the face and pyramids are artificial? And he was like, no, these are all sand, weather-eroded objects, nothing intelligently created or formed in this region. So that really started to pique my curiosity, and I started to look at some of the data and things that were going on Mars, and some things initially just really, made my eyebrows raise even higher. So this is an example as the technology works. You can see they focused in on one special area, and then what they can do then is track an area over time to see geological changes. Some rock or boulder or something fell down the cliff, and over time, wow, we see a difference. The key here is that there were other objects that have been seen by these lenses, and for some reason, it seems like our technology goes defunct when it gets into these regions. Now, this is the original shot of the face on Mars taken in 1976 as the live camera from Viking was transmitting it, and NASA said, oh, it's just a trick of light and shadow. It's nothing to see. And after a few hours, the sun angle changed, and you could no longer see it. It wasn't a face anymore. Well, that was the wrong answer, because there were several researchers, Greg Molinar, Vincent DiPietro, who went through the NASA archives and found several other frame references at a different orbit and the sun being at a different angle, and it still looks like a face. So as you'll see, when I came across this, I actually was able to find the face with other angles of sun. You can see the shadows extending off to the right there, or to your left, or to my left. But what's also really interesting about a lot of this topography here is it looks very similar to what we do on Earth, meaning I see a very clear terrain change between the bright, knobby terrain that are landmass and a shoreline where it goes into a dark, more mellow terrain where the face is. It's almost as if the pyramidal structures are right on the shoreline, beachfront property, lakefront property, and we have an edifice out in the water that can be observed. Here's another angle. Again, a very clear terrain change, a shoreline, an ancient shoreline right there. And it makes sense. I mean, that's what we do here on Earth, right? Is everyone wants to live near a body of water. And that's exactly what Cydonia was. So what really started to intrigue me about NASA and the face on Mars was the quality of the face in just this region was deteriorating. Everything else exponentially increasing. So I took the worst image that they had of the face, And as you can see here, this is one of the more recent ones in 2002, but a progression of 1976 through the current decade, it's gotten worse. How's that possible? And what's, even more so to prove that point, Arius Viralis, other areas on Mars that they image, this is what you see when you go to the NASA site. You see this swath here. That's the type of quality. The face on Mars was that top gray swath. That's how they released the face on Mars. You had to do image and color correction to actually see the bottom swath that you see there. Now, there's 256 shades of gray being used. For some reason, they only used 64 shades of gray over the face on Mars. I don't know why. Making it more difficult for us to extract data is the only thing I can think of. But that's okay, because even with that really very deteriorated image from 1998, I did a simple symmetrical test, using the face. If anyone divides themselves in a mirror halfway down and moves an appendage, you still look the same, in theory, because you're asymmetrical. So the face looking at you as you would a face, turning it towards us, and then I split it down the half so that I have two halves of the face. Look what emerges. So let's just focus on my far left side for a minute. You can see that side is very badly eroded, and when created a mirror image of it, it still looks like there's eyes, nose, definition of facial features. But the left side that's less eroded, when you mirror that, a little close-up of that, this is, we have a pyramid and sphinx in Egypt, and here we have a face and pyramids in Mars. Now this face looks almost lion-like. It has some type of winged headdress. You can see a symmetrical face, and there's eyes, nose, and mouth. So it just seemed to me as a layman, that was too coincidental to just be by nature. And also looking at the face from any other lighting angle, it still looked like a face. What was its purpose then? Why is there a face on Mars? And so kind of looking at other surrounding objects, here in 1976 there's like a dolphin-looking type object, a fish, the age of Pisces maybe. There's some type of dolphin fish thing, and under higher resolution, later technology, 1998, we see symmetrical lines, spacious, spaced almost perfectly. So, again, non-random objects. So looking at the pyramids in this region called Cydonia, under higher resolution, they still look like pyramids. And again, just 1998, there you can see that the angle of the pyramid is shadowed, where here, there it is. It's still pyramidal in nature. So another thing about Mars that really piqued my interest was, they taught us in high school, as an example, that Earth is the only planet with water. Now we know there's water on the moon, water on Mars, water on the rings of Saturn, water on the moons of Jupiter. So water on Mars, this is snow on the surface of Mars from 1976. And what's also interesting is that they always show the sky on Mars as red. But that's because the cameras we're using on the surface aren't adjusted to the spectrum of what the human eye sees. It's taking a much broader spectrum of light. If you color correct the image for what you would see if you were standing on the surface, it's blue. And they somehow always seem to forget to do this, is that that's what Mars looks like, but they never do that. It's very seldom that they'll color correct an image. This is a live NASA conference where they actually somehow thought it was okay to do it, but it's always this Mars is red. No, it's not. So that's an annoying piece that seems to get overlooked. But what's even more interesting is this, now we not only have NASA, but we also have the European Space Agency, the Japanese Space Agency, that are all getting telemetry from Mars. So NASA takes a picture of this, which, it's the Gusev crater, and it looks like some streaks of some type of material, oil, you don't know. But in color, it looks different, because the ESA photographed the same coordinates of the Gusev crater, and that whole area now looks like vegetation in color, rather than just some gray streaks on the ground. So with the detection of a lot of methane in the surface or the atmosphere of Mars, and the combination of clear vegetation, and anyone can go through the NASA archive. The only problem is, if you go like to the Mars Global Surveyor or Malin's Space Science Systems website, there are thousands of images that you have to comb through, and maybe 4 out of those 1,000 show this. And more detailed pictures of this. And this is a low-res version. So they're very high resolution. And, it's up to interpretation. The problem is people go, well, it can't be green on Mars because NASA would tell you. Well, they'd love to tell you, but they can't confirm it yet. So, and that's the problem, is we have data that's actually going in every direction pointing to the fact that there probably is current life on Mars. But we have to do a scientific analysis to confirm that hypothesis rather than just saying, all signs look good. The scientific community just doesn't work like that. So a lot of things with Mars pointing to life, even salt water on Mars, very similar to Earth's origins, and weird artifacts that are currently still being imaged, which I have no idea. It's a large golf ball? I don't know. But again, this is photography coming straight from NASA, unfiltered, supposedly. That could be a whole other topic. If we ever do go to Mars, I think we'll probably find that our origins go beyond a lot further than just Earth. So I very much hope to see in our lifetime a manned mission to Mars. Now, what really intrigued me about Mars was, okay, here's some things on another planet. Well, there's things all over our planet that we still don't have an answer for. And a lot of these are the megalithic monuments. Egypt, of course, is a great example of an edifice built thousands of years ago, claimed to have been built at 2500 BC. However, it turns out that in 10,500 BC, we see something taking place that's a worldwide phenomenon, which I'll touch on some of these other topics, a worldwide phenomenon of creating terrestrial objects aligned to astronomical points. The Giza pyramids align terrestrially at 10,500 BC with the Orion constellation. And in 10,500 BC, the Sphinx is gazing east directly into the constellation of Leo, which is a lion. So you can use any iPad app or iPhone app nowadays for free to tell you where the stars are going to be in the heavens tonight, tomorrow night, or also backwards in time. So at 10,500 BC, the Orion constellation aligns perfectly with the pyramids on the ground. 3 dots, one slightly offset. And the Sphinx gazing directly into the constellation of Leo. So we see a lot of astronomical alignments with megalithic monuments from a time frame built off the books of recorded history, meaning a lot of these megaliths, we can't actually pinpoint who the builders were, and so we'll go through some of that. Obviously, another part of history that's really intriguing is these depictions of flight, where, one of the topics in tonight's overarching thing is the ancient astronaut theory, which simply means that most of the ancient people depicted a time when their gods lived amongst them or visited them from the heavens. Ancient man did not have an understanding of technology that we do today, so they used things as a reference that they knew of in their time frame. If you're living in a clay hut and using stone tools, you're not going to say, I saw the space shuttle. So a lot of these depictions of flight are what they could only describe, some depiction of having the capability of flight. And some of these artifacts are quite detailed. This is from 3800 BC from ancient Iraq, Sumer. And you can see the detail of creating, it's a god called Ishtar, also Inanna. She liked to fly the skies of Earth. That's a pretty well done artifact from, almost 6,000 years ago. But there's a similarity being shown here in something that I can even relate to as being raised as a Christian, which is this symbolic reference of someone coming down and having the power of flight. And in many other Semitic cultures, Middle Eastern cultures, we see this winged disc used in Egyptian culture, the god Isis as an example, and many other depictions of flight from these various epochs of time, but misclassified as either birds or insects. This one is found in Saqqara, Egypt, and it was basically rediscovered by a scientist looking at models across various cultures and said, look, to me, this does not look like a bird. It actually has properties that are more intrinsic to flight rather than a bird. And if you look closely, you can see that the wings, the way it's shaped, it looks more like a plane. the 90-degree angle of the tail fin, that looks more like a plane rather than a bird. And so there weren't just objects, for instance, in Egypt. There were across many continents. These in South America. Here's a collection. Do I have a collection? I don't. I only have one shot. Forgive me. There are many versions of these found, and they all basically look like a plane. And they were mislabeled as insects. So whether it be birds or insects, a lot of these have characteristics that are more intrinsic to flight and are basically just misclassified technology. This one example, Zacharia Sitchin, a famous author who will be touching on his research, found this in a Turkish museum, and the curator didn't have it on display. He's like, you should really put this on display. He's like, but we don't know what it is. He's like, well, why don't you put it on display and tell them that you don't know what it is, but let the user decide. And so, he called this the headless spaceship, or the headless spaceman, and you can see very clear rocket-like characteristics. The nose, everything about it, he's scrunched in there just like an astronaut is when they're scrunched up in the capsule, and clear engine-like, coming out of the back. So a lot of these types of depictions coming out of ancient times basically can be reflected in more modern terminology as something called cargo cult. And we've seen this many times over. And here it is happening thousands of years ago, the same thing. Cargo cult was basically American soldiers going into remote parts of southern Africa or Australia, and they interact with Aboriginal tribes for the first time. They land in a big prop plane. They get out and light up a cigarette, hold out a voice recorder, record the Aboriginal's voice, play it back to him. They don't understand. They think that the soldiers are gods. They don't understand the technology. The plane must be a living thing. So, the soldiers also set up camps, and so they have drop shipments of supplies. Sometimes these shipments would miss the soldier encampment and would land in the middle of the tribe, and they'd crack it open, and it's full of guns and food and can openers and things, and they're like, oh, it's from the gods. So the soldiers eventually leave, take away their camps, and now what do the Aborigines do? They scrape away runways, they build straw models of the aircraft, and they sit there hoping to lure back the visitors. I mean, it's the same exact thing that was happening thousands of years ago. So another part of this, which is very interesting, and there's actually a lady in the audience that has a tattoo that shows this. Thank you. But here's a very interesting portrayal of the power of flight from various cultures. This one's from a fresco in Yugoslavia, painted in the 1500s, I believe. And as you can see, it's been there obviously for a very long time. It's way, way high up in a not very easily accessible part of this monastery. And it's a very crucial scene, obviously showing Jesus on the cross at his crucifixion. But as a side note, we see these depictions of flight taking place on this fresco. And again, it's very characteristic of what you'd call a UFO. It looks like some type of being, humanoid being, and he's got his hand on levers or he's doing something, and it's obviously a craft, some type of craft, and it's in the sky. So, you have to wonder, what is it actually trying to depict? And in this fresco, you can actually see other beings, angels and people and the like, that are shielding themselves from this object in fear, or at least well aware that it's up there and that it exists. So a lot of these pictures really start to raise the question of, what were they trying to depict? And it's not like, if this was just mythology, they went to great lengths to depict this information. The Greek word mythos actually meant information carried by priests and kings as sacred, truthful information. And somehow mythos turned into mythology, and now it's like fairy tale stuff. But no, there's actually a very important process of handing down information that the ancients went to great lengths to document, just as maybe we're doing now. Here's another interesting, well-known fresco, the Madonna painted by St. Giovanni. And you can see over her left shoulder, here's a little more detail, there's something taking place. You can see that there's a gentleman with his dog looking up at an object in the sky. Here's closer detail of that. And it's clearly emanating rays of energy or light. I mean, it's a UFO. It's basically any UFO we get today. It's just It's, energy in a gaseous atmosphere, Earth, so it's a big ball of light. And they went to great note to depict that subtly as a backdrop to this painting. So, shields attacking them from the sky. There was many depictions throughout time, and it's basically what we're still experiencing today of aliens and UFOs, but depicted with their own understandings of technology. A shield that attacked them from the sky. So where my research really started to culminate in kind of wrapping my brain around the structures on Mars and realizing that there's megalithic monuments all over the Earth, where do we really come from? Where's the oldest culture that we have on record? The Sumerian civilization, between this fertile strip of land, Mesopotamia, between the Tigris and the Euphrates River there, it's been called Mesopotamia, Babylon, but it was originally called Sumer, our modern-day Iraq. And what's really interesting about this civilization is they've created over 100 of the firsts needed for a civilization to take place. And they spring up right out of the Stone Age, meaning there's no precursor civilizations that they borrowed this from or could have taught them. It just somehow they know. And their answer for how they know, aha. So one of the things, obviously, that's very crucial to a civilization is writing. Now, we think we're cool with our 26-letter alphabet. Cuneiform script, they used something that looked like an oversized screwdriver, and they would turn and twist it in wet clay, sometimes semi-precious stones. And their cuneiform script had 400 characters, and that's the first alphabet that we have, that we know of, as a complete language. Now, there are a lot of texts, like the Vedic texts in India and such, that date back thousands, like 10,000 years, but a complete intact civilization lies on the shoulders of Sumer currently. It's 6,000 years old, 3800 BC to be exact. So their writing is a very interesting form of writing, and accompanying the writing, they included cylinder seals, which were basically reverse carved imprints on a round cylinder, so that when you roll it into wet clay, it leaves the positive imprint. They had kind of an ancient printing press, so they could disseminate text and pictures very quickly throughout the village or the city. And a lot of the symbology on these artifacts, I'm not a Sumerologist. I can't read cuneiform script, but I can recognize symbols. Not like Jordan Maxwell, but what I can do is, looking at this long, over a decade now, there are certain symbols that repeat and have a meaning. Some of them are shown here. The winged disc, symbolizing a planet called Nibiru, which we'll discuss. The 7 dots of Earth, because Earth was the 7th planet. We'll touch on that too. Why? But there's information being told in pictogram form as well as in text form. I was grateful enough to have I hired a professional antiquities photographer to go to the British Museum, the Louvre in Paris. I'm forgetting another location at the moment. And basically assembled the largest collection online of Sumerian artifacts, so that when you go to my site, all of these are accessible, and hopefully over years in time we can still look at these and have a digital copy. As we know, the museum in Iraq recently was just obliterated, and I would really hate to see a lot of this information lost, like a lot of other cultures have done through time, the Mayan codices and the halls of Alexandria and such. So the Sumerians definitely have something that we want to hang on to. Okay. So there's a lot of these seals that are on display in many of the esoteric museums around the world. What's interesting about this is that there's a mainstream interpretation usually provided with these seals, and then there's also a non-mainstream interpretation, which is what we're discussing tonight. Unfortunately, all the mainstream scholars will squabble over a word or a phrase, but never the context of the information. There's only been a handful of researchers that can actually look at this information and put it into a context that makes sense from a larger perspective. Not, what does the word Nephilim really mean? Who were the Anunnaki? Is that an actual word as a person? What's the planet Nibiru? Is that a real planet? Is it just a word? So there are only a handful of scholars that actually look at the information outside of the context of translating it accurately, slight discrepancies here and there, but what's the overall context? What's it mean? So the Sumerian civilization really is an interesting one because it has many of the biblical tales in their original stone form, unchanged. that story or that tale or that, I guess, a game. You say one thing like God is coming, and you pass it to 5,000 people. A telephone, that's what it's called. It comes back to you and it says God is coming with blue hair and a green spaceship, or it's a variation of the word. So that's basically what's happened throughout time. And what's interesting is that the Sumerian information is unchanged to this day. So one of the things that they're accredited to, of course, that's of great significance is mathematics. They based their math on two numbers, 6 and 10. It's called sexagesimal, but it was literally two numbers, and it allowed them to do very accurate geometry of small and large spaces. And what's interesting is that they also denoted 360 degrees to a circle. Now, very easy to make a circle. You can stick in the dirt and outstretch a string till it's tight, and then just walk, and you made a circle. But they were the first ones to denote 360 degrees to the circle. And they used the symbolic number 12 as a reference in many things that they started as originally from Sumer that we still use today. That number 12 is very significant, as you'll see, but just to touch on some of those, 12 hours in a day, 12 inches in a foot, 12 in a dozen, 12 months in a year. All of these are derivatives from a math system that came out of the Sumerian culture, the number 12 being a significant one. Now, another part of the Sumerian tale that gets very deep and can go hours in another direction for a topic, which is they actually depict living amongst their living gods. Now, as a Christian, they speak of this as there were once giants upon the earth. Now, the Sumerians depict a time when they lived amongst their living gods. And so they have actual information bequeathed by their gods to them as to how they came into existence. And they had symbolic references for several of these key gods. One of them here was always depicted with the double helix as a creation symbol of creating us in their image and in their likeness. But that's something we even still use today to depict DNA, what we're pretty well familiar with, but also the double helix as just a representation that when you go into any medical institution, we see this symbol still used symbolically today. The origins of that started in Sumer. Now, some of these tablets actually go into quite a bit of detail that really start to raise the eyebrows and go, The whole story of Adam and Eve and the creation of Adam and taking a rib of Adam to create Eve. Well, the Sumerians have a story of how they created the first Adam. Not an Adam as in hi Adam, Adam as in a being. Adamu in Hebrew means plural for worker. So they have a story that actually explains how they created the first Adam. And the god, Ninharsad, is showing, my hands have made it. And I'm holding up the first working being. You can see tubes, test tubes and jars, like I'm pulling something out of a jar. Did they use in vitro fertilization? They were using some type of technology, and they just describe a process of how the kidney didn't function. The arm didn't work, until finally the perfect working model. My hands have made it. So there's a lot of texts in stone, unchanged, that parallel the biblical tales that we have in the Old Testament as well as the New King James Version. So it really starts to raise a question about a lot of the biblical tales of angels and this angelic presence described usually through a mythological lens. Another thing is they're always depicted with a halo. We'll touch on that in a second too. But it's basically always just kind of open for interpretation. Heaven, they come from heaven. Where is heaven? So the Sumerians were very specific in saying where their gods came from. They said they came from another planet within our solar system. Now, the kicker to that is that they provided scientific documentation of the distance between the planets, what the planets look like in space. We've been able to test that with our own technology and sending probes and such, and have confirmed what the Sumerians have been saying. And I'll show some of that information. But a lot of these depictions show this visitation taking place. And as a backdrop, it's always interesting that whenever there's this platform and one of the kings has a Sumerian king is being greeted by the Anunnaki, there's always people holding up a platform for this to take place. Here's another shot of that. I call them the taxpayers. I like this alien behind me too. This is a nice shot. It's like we almost want to stand him up and introduce, but you'll have your time. So a lot of these depictions are all throughout Iran and Iraq that show this symbolic coming down of a being in a winged disc. And what's really interesting of some of this symbology is if you look at this depiction of an Anunnaki, and the basic reason why there's a bird-like physique is commander of a spaceport, is what the translation comes to. But you can see some detail. He's holding up symbolically the tree or the food of life. He's holding the water of life in a basket. He even has what looks like a wristwatch possibly on. Now, is that just a symbolic band maybe he was wearing? I don't know. But misrepresented technology? Very possibly. What I do see is the same reference of what we do today. Meaning we can't look at the Anunnaki and say, okay, were they winged beings? Well, here we are using a symbolic reference to say we had the power of flight. I seriously doubt 6,000 years from now they're going to look back on our civilization and say, so they landed birds on the moon? I don't understand. No, we were basically using the eagle to say we had the power of flight. Houston, the eagle has landed. It's the same symbolic reference that the Sumerians depicting the Anunnaki as winged beings are trying to bequeath to us. And it's a clear parallel to what they're showing us with their imagery. Now, again, the Sumerians left us thousands of these stone tablets, and some of them record astronomical information over thousands of years. High priests who could read the information, and they would work with a scribe who could write. So usually reading and writing Sumerian was a skill, and you would work with a high priest, someone who would basically work with the Anunnaki, and they would record all this information. But it was very sacred information to actually know what a lot of these tablets say. And a lot of these tablets, for instance, speak of astronomical information tracked over hundreds of years, positions of the stars and planets. And this is some new research, which I have some slides on it, but it's a new direction that I'm going into, which is cyclical astronomy. There are things that we can see a process taking place, the sun setting, and we go around the sun every year, but there are other larger cycles that the ancients were somehow aware of, and we'll touch on that. So the Sumerians recorded over hundreds of years observations. A high priest could tell you 50 years in advance on one specific day when there would be a solar eclipse or a lunar eclipse. So they had testable, accurate astronomical data. They also had some very interesting origin tales that parallel our biblical, the 7 days of creation and how God created the heavens and the earth and us. Well, the Sumerians have a lot of these same stories, but on stone tablets. For instance, the biblical 7 days of creation, Sumerians have 7 tablets of creation that tell a much more detailed explanation and story of how this process took place. Now, one of the things, of course, of interest is that the Sumerians depicted the outer planets, the colors of the outer planets, the distance between them. When we finally sent probes like Galileo and Voyager in the late 70s and early 80s to the far reaches of our solar system and took the first color photographs, it matched the Sumerian descriptions from 6,000 years ago. That's a video that didn't play, bummer. But what you can see here are actual Sumerian seals depicting Nibiru when it was in close proximity to Earth. Now, Nibiru had 2 depictions coming from the Sumerian culture. It was depicted as a glowing cross in the sky and also as the winged disc. And as it was near a time of nearing Earth, they would depict it as a glowing cross in the sky, the home world of where their gods came from. Mind you, this is 4,000 years before Jesus on the cross. And here's some of those translations of how this symbol has evolved from various cultures, still kind of using the same reference of a winged disc, but clear cylinder seal depictions of a time when the sun is visible and so is a glowing cross in the sky, symbolizing that the world of the gods is passing by. Now, again, I'm not a Sumerologist, but I've been able to decipher and look at these symbols long enough that this one have caught my interest because it's showing Nibiru as a cross with its moon, and then it's also showing the 7 dots of Earth with our crescent moon. Nibiru and Earth in one little cylinder seal there. What does it mean exactly? Couldn't tell you. Now, a lot of these tablets, again, have reflection on biblical tales. So this one, again, the Epic of Creation, is part of a much longer set of tablets that, again, have a parallel of our biblical tales in a stone version that's unchanged. Now, what's really interesting about this creation story on the 7 tablets of creation, the Enuma Elish, it's actually a much larger set of 11 tablets. But the pinnacle story in this is that basically they describe how our solar system came into being. And they describe how another planet is introduced into our solar system at a very early age and reforms everything into the current model we have today and explains a lot of the astronomical and cosmological pieces that we still don't have an answer for. So imagine a large planet whacking our Earth. Now, what the Sumerians describe is that a very large planet they called Nibiru, I've labeled it Planet X for some reasons as we'll get into later. Nibiru, or Planet X, was gravitationally attracted to our outer planets, and as it came into the inner part of our solar system, on one of the successive orbits, it hit our planet, and then on one of the orbits, one of the moons of Nibiru hit our planet hard enough that it fractured our Earth at the time they called Tiamat. It fractured our Earth, strewing out the asteroid belt and moving Earth into its new orbit where it is today. The Bible calls the asteroid belt the hammered out bracelet. So Nibiru then goes on to have this very elongated 3,600-year orbit where 1 year, so we go around the sun once every 365 days. A solar year for us is one loop around the sun, 365 days. A solar orbit for Nibiru is 3,600 of our years. Now there's a key point there to just kind of bring up in the sense that if you're a being living on a planet that goes around the sun like that, and it takes 3,600 of our years, it's still 1 year for you. So as an example, the Anunnaki are basically beings living on this planet on this long orbit. They come to visit us. Let's say, as an example, Jesus was an Anunnaki, and he's 20. And he comes and visits, and he's very young, and he bequeaths his knowledge, and through whatever transformation process he's able to die and resurrect, he leaves and says, I will return. He comes back 3,600 years later on Earth. He's only aged 1 year. And he still looks the same to us. So that also brings up the question of longevity, of going to heaven. Everyone was told, you will give the gift of going to heaven. Well, if you went to Nibiru, and you just spent 1 year on Nibiru, and came back, and you were so excited to tell everybody what you've seen and all this stuff, everyone you know, everything that you knew is gone, because it's been 3,600 years on Earth for your 1 year going around the sun at that magnitude. So there is a distance equation of lifespan with gravity and how long of a solar year orbit you have. And unfortunately, our solar year is 365 days versus Nibiru is 3,600 years. So that's a hard thing to wrap the mind around, but I thought I'd at least bring it up. There have been a lot of recent theories. My videos aren't playing. That's okay. There's been a lot of recent theories about the cosmology of our solar system, why the planets are the way they are, how our moon formed. This one was called Orpheus theory, and it states a large planet whacks our primitive Earth, and then the debris coalesce to make our moon. Orpheus theory. Now that's not too far-fetched from what the Sumerians described 6,000 years ago. It seems like we're now just starting to catch up to them in this type of an understanding. So the idea of a half a planet. Now, that's not that far-fetched when you think about our own understanding that Earth was half a planet. It used to be one large landmass. All the mass of land was just one chunk. Now, globes, all worlds siphon into a sphere, so our world is, spherical, but like the skin of an apple, the continents have just peeled to where they are, but in its inception, it was just half a planet, and we can still see evidence of this. All the continents look as though they fit. They can all kind of be rearranged as to where they used to be. So that literally supports the idea that Earth literally was one landmass at one point. Why? Now, unfortunately, this topic has crossed over into something that has been brought up recently in this decade, I should say, is a lot of people have become aware of the idea of a Planet X, Nibiru, because there's scientific research today showing we're looking for another planet beyond Pluto, and if it's 48 times the size of Earth, it could be Nibiru. Will we discover it in our lifetime? That's another topic, but a lot of people are jumping to that conclusion of saying in 2012, all these changes, the earthquakes, Japan, all this stuff, it's because Nibiru is revolving around the sun right now. I personally don't believe that. I have seen no evidence of that. I've been a big believer in the amateur astronomical community. They've always seen things before the professional community. Hale-Bopp, Shoemaker-Levy 9, comet that broke up into large fragments, 9 fragments and impacted Jupiter. The amateur community always finds these and then escalates it to the professional community for confirmation. So if there is a planet 4 to 8 times the size of Earth anywhere near us, I have faith that our community will see it. That isn't to say, in another topic which I'll touch on, I'm going to wait though, which is there is some things with 2012 that being affected by the electromagnetics of other stars or planets, we could be coming into a time that there is some merit to that, and I'll discuss in a little while. Staying on the topic of Planet X coming into our solar system, I say the likelihood that it's going to cause catastrophic events is simply because the amount of times it's already gone through our solar system. We're looking at over 1 million times that Nibiru has orbited through the inner part of our solar system. So if you just do some simple math, forgive me, I'm taking off my jacket because it's a little bit hot. If you look at just some simple math here of when we look at the inception of the solar system 4.7 billion years ago, Nibiru's orbit at 3,600 years. So if you divide 4.7 by 30, or if you divide 4.7 by 3,600, I'm saying that backwards, aren't I? Okay. Basically, it's orbited over 1 million times. So to say that the next time it comes by, it's going to cause gravitational effects, that's a variable that's not. I don't think anyone's positioned to say they know what's going to happen or when it's going to happen. Now, what is interesting about the Sumerian depictions as Earth as the 7th planet is, we assume since we're the 3rd planet from the sun that we're, the 3rd rock from the sun, like the TV show. But what makes more sense is actually beings coming from outside of our solar system would count 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7. Earth is the 7th planet. You are on the 7th planet. 7 days in a week, the sacred number 7. 7 days in creation. They used a lot of symbolic reference, but they called Earth Ki, the 7th planet. Now here's just a symbolic reference or an artistic rendition, not to scale, of what the Sumerians' solar system looked like. So they counted the 9 planets that we know of, the sun, our moon, and then this additional planet, Nibiru, as the 12th member of our solar system. Now, what's really interesting is that through the time of Copernicus and Galileo, man thought that we were the center of the solar system. We didn't realize that we orbited the sun. We had to have advances in mathematics and the telescope to come to that conclusion. However, the Sumerians depicted that accurately well into our past. Thousands of years ago, somehow they knew that the sun is in the center, and all of the planets we know of in their correct size and position are being shown here. Now, this is basically just a backdrop of a seal that's showing a god escorting one of the Sumerians to another Anunnaki god, and they're bequeathing him the plow, modern agriculture. But as a backdrop, you see this complete model of our solar system, and even below it, what looks like our modern-day rocket in top of a launch pad about to take off. I don't know what else that depiction is, but that is symbolically shown in many depictions as a shem, as a detachable piece of how they ascended and descended to the surface of the planet. And across many cultures, there's these depictions of ancient rocket ships, or a depiction of them entering some type of a craft for this process. So it's very interesting, some of the details that they put in here as subtle knowledge to verify what they were saying. Knowledge of astronomy is key. Now here's an interesting tablet which you won't find in the area of shapes and sizes. This is in the British Museum talking about writing. But what's interesting is that ancient man wasn't supposed to be familiar with the shape of an ellipse. But here it is. They have a circular tablet. Now, just this one part of the text, Zacharia Sitchin, who's a famous linguist, translated this tablet and found that this is basically telling the course correction they took from Nibiru to where Earth was. You can see one of the lines in red is pointing to a large shaded triangle, which is the mountainous planet of Nibiru, and they took a course correction. They went by 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7 planets to get to where Earth was. And the text on the side said words like rocket, 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 mountain, pile up, high, 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 stuff like that. So it's a pretty interesting piece of information to be, again, coming out of a culture from 6,000 years ago. So the one inclusion that they had in their depiction of the solar system was an additional planet, Nibiru, and that's the one planet that we are still currently looking for. In our modern astronomy, we weren't really sure that a planet could have an elliptical orbit until the Hubble took its first photograph of a protoplanet around a star, not our solar system, but it had an egg-shaped elliptical orbit. They've actually started to realize that most of the external solar systems that we've been filming are binary. They have 2 suns. So more than likely we are binary and we have 2 suns as well, but our second sun is a failed sun called a brown dwarf. It's no longer emanating light. But there's evidence to support this based upon most other solar systems have 2 suns. And we are aware that there's a large Oort cloud, another asteroid belt, billions of miles out there beyond Pluto. So there's probably another sun, a failed star out there, and another theoretical planet they call Nemesis that orbits that and possibly dislodges comets and debris and sends it towards the inner part of our solar system. So they're learning a lot more about the nature of our cosmology and how it's expanding in nature for our understanding. Another interesting hypothesis is the exploded planet theory, because a lot of our planets, our moon, the surface of Mars, are inundated with surface fragments, impact holes, and we can't really explain why. Now, this planet probably does still exist. I don't believe it's exploded. That is something that I'll at least note, because there is evidence for a lot of activity of being bombarded. But NASA is actually still searching for this planet as well. Now, they're not looking for it from the ancient perspective of that there's aliens on it, but they are aware that astronomical influences have pointed to the fact that there's another large body that they're still trying to locate and haven't done so accurately yet. For some time now, though, it's been mentioned that they've been detecting some large body in space, or have imaged some large body, and they're not sure if it's possibly in an orbit that's a part of our solar system. This is a diagram, and I will confirm it's real because my father worked for Encyclopedia Britannica for 35 years. This is an Encyclopedia Britannica diagram that actually shows a dead star 50 billion miles out, or 10 billion miles out. It's actually showing that we were a binary solar system back then, and then it had a 10th planet. Let's get out of the camera here for a second. A 10th planet is actually noted in this 1983 diagram. So this knowledge goes back quite a distance. It's just a matter of being able to accurately confirm it scientifically. So there has been some research in the last few decades where the gentleman here, Dr. Robert Harrington, was the lead astronomer for the Naval Observatory. And he took plates, astronomical plates in the southern hemisphere, where he theorized that there's a large planet X that can explain all the orbital perturbations, all the planets being pulled in one direction, Uranus being tilted on its side, Neptune and Pluto possibly being dislodged moons of Saturn. So he basically went through a whole scenario of possibilities as to where this planet could be located, and he collaborated with Zacharia Sitchin, which I might have a photo of this. He collaborated with Zacharia Sitchin, where he looked at his NASA model for a 10th planet, and Zacharia Sitchin presented his Sumerian model of Nibiru, and they very much so overlapped in similarity. So those are his astronomical plates that are still stored in the Harvard Astronomical Abstracts online, and anyone can reference these. So we have a whole bunch of telescopes. This is a video that unfortunately isn't playing. We have a whole bunch of telescopes like the Wide Field Infrared Explorer, CERTIF, which is another telescope that we've recently launched that has very accurate infrared capability. It sits out in space, super cooled, and basically it allows for observing through large dust clouds that the Hubble wasn't able to penetrate through. Now they can fine-tune the temperature of the telescope to match these dust clouds, and it penetrates right through, and we get these beautiful views that we've never seen before. So we're learning about a whole new classification of planets in different sizes, not just from our sun and gas giants like Jupiter, but a whole bunch in between. And these have now come onto the astronomical radar of new planets. Do we disable Pluto as a planet and name these other ones? They haven't discovered anything yet that I would call a planet. Chunks of ice, 1,000 kilometers at best, but nothing the size, like 4 to 8 times the size of Earth. Nothing that's an actual planet. But we have a bunch of different observatories around the world looking for new exoplanets, extrasolar planets, and this information has just been coming out over the last couple of decades in a flurry. Pluto has a new far-out peer. A mystery revolves around the sun. A 10th planet. So these are all current news articles talking about the idea that there's a large body beyond Pluto that they're hopefully trying to locate. Forgive me, it's a little toasty up here. Okay, so where this crosses over is the fact that the Sumerians spoke of a similar planet, which matched a lot of the modern understandings for a large body beyond Pluto, an extrasolar planet that we're now trying to look for. So they were very specific in saying that they were aware of this planet, and that's where the Anunnaki came from. Now, Zacharia Sitchin met with Dr. Harrington, as I mentioned, and here are those two orbital models. You can see the NASA one does more of a three-dimensional model, so his ellipse is going three-dimensionally into space versus Zacharia on a 2D plane, but it's still the same elliptical orbit. Same thing, very much crossing over. And so Zacharia Sitchin, I'll quickly touch on, is a scholar, unfortunately, that passed away last year. Very esoteric research, 50 years of research, 50 years of research. Wrote a series of books called the Earth Chronicles. One of the handful of Sumerologists in the world that can directly translate cuneiform script. So he basically started with a base in Sumer and branched to many other cultures, and seeing how this knowledge was passed into other cultures and even used to this day, but stemmed originally from Sumer. So one thing I'd like to touch on is some of the pieces that suggest that we could have some threats from space. I'm sorry my videos aren't working, but it does kind of tie into the idea of a Planet X. There have been predicted extinction events, like why the dinosaurs died. And some of this has astronomical implications. As an example, this was Shoemaker-Levy 9, broke up into 9 large fragments and impacted Jupiter and left these large holes. That one that's in the center here could fit like 8 to 10 Earths in just that. I mean, it's huge. NASA said, oh, this impact isn't going to be anything astronomically significant. No need for the amateur astronomy community to watch or observe, right? So, I mean, you think about things entering our solar system that could potentially whack us. It is at least good to be aware and have a radar that there are outside variables from our 9-to-5 job and paying our bills and such that, you know, it doesn't help to have some preparedness plan just in case there was an emergency. And I think a lot of people got that eye-opening experience with what we just saw in Japan. So Dr. Mueller was one of the principal people who suggested this idea that there's another planet orbiting our second sun, and he called it Nemesis. I think I have a diagram here, basically showing how he postulated Nemesis's orbit kind of wobbled around the sun, but it would periodically dislodge comets and debris and send them towards the inner part of our solar system, possibly what caused the extinction of the dinosaurs. And this is basically just one of our lenses, again showing the amount of, this is like our whole galaxy, and so this is a mosaic stitched together. And so the amount of detail and color we're getting is, I mean, it's just unbelievable, the leaps we're getting with our technology.
So this is recent news that's coming out. I think if you can look here right under Jupiter to the left, you see February 14th, 2011. So recent news is still talking about looking for a Jupiter-sized or large planet within our solar system that's causing effects. And here's kind of an understanding of this solar system, this asteroid belt, billions of miles out there, that possibly has another planet that's orbiting it. Another part of this puzzle is the Sumerian texts, again, are in stone form and talk or parallel a lot of the biblical tales. One of the most famous biblical tales is the Great Flood. Now, what's interesting about this information is that let me go back there. I thought there was a video that would play, but forgive me. There's evidence to show knowledge of how the continents were connected as one landmass, or even going back in time what the geography or topography of these looked like, even under the sheets of ice from the North and South Pole. All of this information was passed down from Mesopotamian sources and then used by navigators and traced on gazelle hides and such and passed along. Here's another one called the Phineas map. But what's really interesting about these maps is they actually show the topography of the land underneath the ice. The ice is like a mile thick. You'd need ground-penetrating radar to actually see the landmass separated from where the ice is. And somehow this is all accurately depicted on some of these maps. It really starts to raise the question about some of these stories, for instance, about the flood tablet, where there's a well-known version in the Bible where there's a great flood and such. However, there's actually a Sumerian derivative that's stored in the British Museum, and it was found by one of the curators of the British Museum. His name was George Smith, and when he was doing some excavations in the late 1800s for the British Museum in Iraq, he found this tablet, and in deciphering it, he realized that it was describing a Sumerian named Utnapishtim, who was chosen by a Sumerian god to build a craft and take aboard the animals and take aboard the animals and plants and such aboard the craft because there'd be a great flood. And here it is in its stone original form. So he flipped out and raised his hands and was like, oh my God, with the realization that this could be the actual story of the flood in its original form. So a lot of the things relating to the idea of a great flood take on a different epic of information when the Sumerians give specific reasons why there was a great flood. They explain that on Nibiru's successive orbit, it caused gravitational effects on our tectonic plates, and the ice sheets in the North and South Pole basically cracked off like large pieces of ice, dropping into a glass of water. Our water levels rose instantly, hence a great flood, similar to what we might have just seen in Japan on a tsunami level. So a lot of this information was recorded in these stone tablets that were retold into our current version of the Bible. Like the idea that there were giants upon the earth, the Sumerians actually depicted in several situations the Anunnaki as if he were to stand up, he would see that he'd be standing much taller than the Sumerians, as if he were an actual physical giant. Now, was he an actual giant, or was he more of a renowned great person? A lot of evidence is pointing to the fact that they were actually larger beings. There are other gods, like the Mayan god King Pakal, and his sarcophagus. He's depicted as he was known to be 7 or 8 feet tall. His sarcophagus alone is like 10 feet. It's huge. So there is some relevance in the fact that many of these beings that visit us, in a sense, might have actually had a larger physique than what we currently do. Okay, let's see. I think that's where I'm going to kind of wrap it up. I thought I was going into another topic, but basically I'm going to touch on a couple more topics here and then open it up for some questions. I did not bring any books tonight, so if anyone's interested in learning more about my research, I have recently published a book. It's a very short book, though. So it's only about 70 pages. My idea is it's more of a Cliff Notes introduction to this information. It's a quick read, easy to digest, and easy to pass on to someone else for them to kind of get into the loop. I also touched on something in the beginning about getting involved in the research. Now, what I've developed is actually an iPhone and an iPad app, soon to be Android as well, called Paranormal Sightings Tool. And I'm in the process of hopefully making this into a TV show, but that still remains to see if it'll come to fruition. But it's an app that's available now, and basically what it does is allows you to report paranormal activity. So if, let's say someone sees a UFO, they could use this app to snap a photo of that sighting, and then place an icon on the map where that sighting took place. Then everyone else gets an alert, Jason just saw a UFO. Vigalis would then be able to go out and go, I'm in that location, and take a shot and have an additional triangulation now of where this thing is going in real time. So it's a device that will allow people to actually get involved with the research and hopefully potentially be involved in some TV show activity if this comes into fruition, where it would be user-generated content, and the best sightings we would actually turn into a TV show each week. The only reason why I show this really at MUFON is that I'm really trying to get in touch with the principal MUFON person because I'd like to release a MUFON-sponsored version to give the MUFON investigators the tools to actually do some investigating with current technology. And using an iPhone or an iPad, this is a great format to penetrate the boundaries of our borders and actually have a global audience of ufologists. So check it out. I recommend giving the app a shot. It is fun.
Anyway, I'd like to thank Jason Martell for coming and giving a great talk.
Thank you, Steve. Thank you.